Blessings, one and all, and welcome to the Ascension Podcast. I'm your host, Paul James Caden, and I wanted to make a very short podcast here. I didn't have a show over the weekend like I usually do because I've been doing a lot of pondering for a couple of weeks now, and I'm going to get into those ponderings in just a moment. But starting next week on the show, and this is a moment where I know at least three people are going to go, oh, but that's okay. Because, once again, I'm going to be making some changes to the podcast. And, I don't mind doing that because I never really looked for big numbers or popularity. I mean, if that happens, great, but I always look for what I'm feeling or where I feel that, kind of the spirit is leading me as far as a creative process with the show and also the spiritual message and the content. Because the main drive behind any show that I've ever done has always been to try to help people, to try to lift people up. And, when I retired the spirit side, and I used to get into some pretty heavy subject matter on that show, I said to myself, I want to do something that's lighter. I don't want to get into those heavier or even darker subjects, like dark into like prophecy or conspiracy, whether that conspiracy be true or false. I wanted to stay away from that and just have something more uplifting to the soul. And so I retired the spirit side, rather quickly. And as I said, in the show after, I created a show called Zen Spirit. And I said this might be a temporary thing. It's still kind of a process because I had the spirit side for a long time, and finding something that kind of suited was I knew it wasn't going to be easy, a new pair of shoes, so to speak. And then I eventually came to the Ascension Podcast, and I did that show. A couple of shows. I did the one about 411 missing persons and invisible predators, and then the following week I did the show about the jinn, and people really like those shows, and that really got me thinking, and I was thinking before that, about a week before that, looking at the world, seeing what's happening in the world, the way people are acting, everything that's going on in Ukraine, which could really ignite World War III if things go in the right or the wrong direction. And I don't know, I just felt that unction in my spirit that said, uplifting is good, and I'm always going to do uplifting shows about mysticism and angels and personal spiritual growth and personal connection with God. Those are always a part of my repertoire. But I feel that unction, if you will, to really start talking about some of those deeper subjects again, but in a bit of a different context than I did with the spirit side before I retired that show. And when I did the show about the jinn, that really got me thinking. And again, a lot of people really enjoyed that particular podcast. It just really got my wheels turning, to have a show where I tackle those deeper subjects, whether it be deeper delving into the paranormal, like the 411 and the jinn, whether it be prophecy, what's happening in our world, why is this happening, what are we kind of looking at here. And I had a show some years back when I was thinking of retiring the spirit side, and I had a secondary show called The Message. And I really, really liked that show. And basically, what it was is that it looked at the events of our world more through that uh, mystical, Sufi, and even Quranic perspective, but also, bringing in some of the prophecies and perspectives that are in the Bible that agree with what's written, in the Quranic text. And people that have followed my show since the beginning know that I spent probably about 6.5 years of my life in the more mystical Sufi practices. And I read the Quran. I didn't go to any mosque. I didn't get involved with religion as far as Islam is concerned, because in my studies of Islam and walking, more than a mile in those shoes and the mystical aspect of the Islamic faith and Sufism, in my studies, a lot of things we hear about Islam, about chopping people's heads off, gouging out their eyes, and violence, and kill those that don't conform to this religion. And some of you may have heard me say this before, but for those of you who haven't, and it's certainly something that bears repeating, these ideas are something that come from a group of sayings supposedly by Muhammad that are called the Hadith. And the Hadith are just that, a collection of sayings supposedly said by Muhammad, but they were collected some 250 years after his death. So that's a lot of hearsay. I knew a guy who knew a guy who knew a guy who knew a woman who knew a guy who knew another person whose brother was a follower of, Muhammad, and he said this. And a lot of problem with the Hadith. There are those Muslims out there who call themselves Quranites or Quranites, and they believe Quran only because of the Hadith contradicts so much of what is written in the Quran. And there's some really good, what you would call, Quranite scholars out there who've really taken to task the religion of Islam and said, hey, we need reforms, because a lot of people are getting a lot of crazy ideas with over these 6,000 hadiths that, come from all over the place. And some groups have this many and some groups have that many. And, they just get crazy. And some people pick and choose the hadiths they want to believe in. If a dictator or an imam, has violent tendencies, naturally they're going to pick those ones that, those hadiths that are very violent and vulgar, and hateful, even though the Quran says that a person is allowed to fight only when you are attacked. But if you attack someone else and you hate someone else, you're spreading evil and mischief upon the earth, and God does not approve of this. And those kind of people will find their place in the fire after they leave this earth. So that was my path the kind of the Qur'anite Sufi kind of path that I was in for a while, and I've always had a great love for it, even after I kind of came out of it for a while. I never rejected it. It was always kind of there, and I would read literature. But when you look into the Quran itself, and you look at some of the Islamic prophecies, how much sense they make. And then when you look at what's happening in our world right now through that lens, a lot of things really start to come into focus. And especially the Quran in no way says, oh, the Bible, Old Testament, New Testament, get rid of it. No, the Quran says we are to honor and believe in the scriptures that came before, the Old Testament and the Gospels of Jesus. So all of these things combined with their prophetic view can be very enlightening and really fine-tune some things about ourselves, about our world, about events that are happening or going to happen. And hence was born at one time the secondary show that I had called The Message. And I had The Message for a little while, and it was not as popular as the spirit side, but I eventually just kind of, let it be. But I feel compelled now to revive that show because of the things that are happening in the world, because of things I've been thinking about and contemplating and witnessing, going on in society. Being aware of the biblical, but also the Quranic prophecies. I sometimes see things in the news and something will come to mind to be like, wow, we really are living in a very interesting time. That, who knows, it could be the beginning of, what the Quran calls the last day, or the last days spoken of in the Bible, Judgment Day. Now, when I say that, we have to understand, as I've always said, certain prophecies are conditional in the Bible and in Islam. We can always change our ways, change our direction individually, as a nation, as a world, and of course, change the outcome. Or we can keep moving in the wrong direction and take ourselves headlong into probably some things we wished we hadn't once we arrive at that very unpleasant destination. I think prophecy, as it is presented in the Christian fundamentalist evangelical circles, has been really polluted. It has been really misunderstood. They've created really a delusion around it because everybody thinks they're a prophet. I mean, just go on YouTube and you'll see all these people, oh, I had a dream. God gave me a dream. God showed me in a vision, the rapture's coming. This is happening. This is going to happen. That's going to happen. And funny thing is, all of it has failed. None of it's come to pass. So that tells me there's something wrong with that idea of prophecy and what prophecy is from the biblical and the Quranic perspective. So I want to bring, when I talk about these things, I want to bring kind of a different view, a different perspective, if you will, of prophecy. But again, I also want to talk about, other things, as I said, mysticism, personal spiritual growth, growing close to God, angels, current events, in that prophetic kind of perspective. If road signs are pointing toward a certain thing or a mindset that's prevalent in society. So that's kind of where I feel everything is nudging me at the moment to say, hey, revive that particular show. Do something with this. This is a time where these kinds of conversations, these kinds of messages, if you will, are really needed. And that's, something my podcast has always been about, putting out the spiritual message, the spiritual perspective for anybody that finds them and it makes sense to them. The work that I do and have put into these particular shows, and there's the common thread that runs throughout all of them. And like I said, something just is really pulling me in that direction. I had the thought, I said, I'm not going to do it. I'm just going to stick with the Ascension podcast, but something just keeps very strongly pulling me. So next week, I will be returning to, the Message podcast. And not a lot's really going to change. The graphics for the podcast are going to be basically the same, new title and maybe a different little logo up in the corner. Most of the subject matter is going to be the same, except we're going to have that look at the world and events and society through that Quranic lens. And hopefully, by doing that as well, we can learn a little something about that particular book, the Quran, that has been greatly misunderstood by many in the West. We've been fed a lot of information that is false, that is not so. People don't understand how to read the Quran because it doesn't read like a novel. It doesn't read like the Bible, page 1, A, B, C, D, E, F, G. It's a very different kind of book. And if we don't understand how to read and understand it, we're going to get ourselves into a lot of confusion and a lot of assumptions. But it really does have a lot of very interesting things to say. And I'm hoping to bring that to the show and kind of enlighten the landscape a little bit of our world, of religion, of what maybe we could be expecting in the near future if we keep going in this direction. We hear a lot about also the elites, all the conspiracy theories, they're doing this and they're doing that. Well, in fact, the Quran does have something to say about that. These ruling elites who always get into corruption and spreading mischief and evil upon the earth. They say they believe in God, but then when they're alone by themselves, they plot war and greed and even vocalize their disbelief. It's money before God. It's greed before God. It's war before God. It's, whatever their agenda is before God. So these would be people who claim to be believers, whether they be Jewish, Christian, Muslim, or whatever, but in their hearts, they follow that which is evil. So there is something to be said about all that as well, that I want to delve into in that particular show once it gets rolling. So a lot of topics, a little bit different, but I think it's going to be interesting, and I think this is something that needs to be put out there at the moment. And like I said, I have no issue being fluid with my show because it is what it is. It's a creative work. It's something that's a creative and spiritual outlet for me. You know what I'm feeling in my life, what I'm thinking about in my life, what I'm seeing in my life, the perspective I'm having on things, especially from that spiritual perspective. And I always like that to reflect in the show. And if people like it, that's great. If they don't, and they say, "Oh, that's this is too much for me," well, that's great too. Like I said, I'm not looking for big numbers and popularity. If that's something that happens, that's great. If not, if one person listens, that's who's supposed to listen. I always look at it as doing God's work, and somewhere along the line, um, it will all make sense, in the when all is said and done. And the spirit side was big shoes to fill with a podcast, but I tried to retire it a couple times, but I brought it back because I never really found anything that fit. But the spirit side always tended to get um, maybe a little too political. It was a show that became cemented into certain topics that if I deviated from, people just wouldn't listen. They wanted topic A and B, or A, B, and C. And it was very hard to bring new subject matter to that show, even though it was supposed to be a show that was very open to a lot of different types of conversation. It somehow and I think that happened because at one time I started to really cater to the YouTube community. I had this notion where, yeah, I want the big numbers. I want a lot of people to listen. I want my message to get out there. And when I kind of pandered to a certain group of people, the show just became too crystallized. And then there were various things that, I tried, and some of them were okay for a while, but they just kind of seemed like a car where one of the tires were a little bit soft or a little bit flat. It just wasn't a smooth run or a smooth feel for me. And, that's why I've experimented with certain things. I don't want to go back to the spirit side. Um, I could revive that show in 10 years, and I think people would still expect it to be a certain way. It's just done what it's supposed to do. But I think now, and who knows, maybe 6 months I'll have another idea and say, hey, I want to do this. But right now, I really don't think so. I think the message is something that is fluid enough that it will bring in all the subject matter that I want to bring into it. And I think people will enjoy it. At least the people that, are supposed to find it and enjoy it. And, it's also out there for people to take these ideas to their family members, to their friends. We have to start that chain reaction of love, that chain reaction of truth. Because Lord knows there's a lot of lies being passed around out there. So I think this is something that it feels right. I think I could walk a lot of miles in this pair of shoes. And next week we'll be, getting into the message. So, I hope I didn't ramble here too much. This was just a really off the cuff um, introduction, a little bit of a conversation introduction about, the changes and why I do it and how I feel about things. And just as me, as a dude with sitting behind a microphone, sharing my thoughts, um, my creative process, my spiritual message, work for God process, and see where we all go from here. I think it's going to be a good change. I think it's going to bring a lot of things to the table that will be very interesting. So, folks, thanks for listening. Like I said, I didn't script this. I didn't really think about it. I just plugged in the mic and said, here we go. Here's what I'm going to do. And, you know, um, oh, gee, we got about 26 minutes on the clock. So that's 26 minutes of me just kind of rambling on. But I guess that's okay, for a little information about the introduction and the reasons of why certain things are the way they are with the Paul James Caiden podcast. So, folks, I'll see you next week. I hope to have another very interesting show, kind of coming right off of that show about the 411 and the jinn. I'm hoping to bring something that's interesting, um, engaging, and filled with a lot of information that will make us think. So thanks for listening. I'll see you next week on the podcast.